The heart pumping function can be measured by cardiac output. What factors affect it? Why is there no decline in the cardiac function curve? To settle these questions, we'll learn the factors affecting cardiac output. Cardiac output is equal to stroke volume multiplied by heart rate. The amount of stroke volume depends on ventricular preload, afterload, and myocardial contractility. So, 4 factors affect cardiac output. The first is preload. The load that muscle bears before contraction is preload, which determines the initial length. For the heart, the initial length is determined by the ventricular volume at the end of diastole. To the heart, pressure is proportional to the volume in a certain range. At the end of diastole, the atrial pressure is almost equal to the ventricular pressure and is easy to measure. Therefore, the atrial pressure at the end of diastole is often used to reflect the ventricular preload. In experiment, stroke volume changes with the ventricular and diastolic pressure, forming the function curve. The curve can be divided into 3 parts. The first is the ascending branch. The pressure changes between 5 and 15 millimeters of mercury. The stroke volume changes correspondingly. At normal, the left ventricular and diastolic pressure is only 5 to 6 millimeters of mercury, while the optimal preload is 12 and 15 millimeters of mercury, indicating that the left ventricle has a large initial length reserve. The pressure changes between 15 and 20 millimeters of mercury. The curve is flat. The pressure is higher than 20 millimeters of mercury. The curve is also flat or slightly downhill. There's no descending branch as skeletal muscle. Before optimal initial length, if the preload increased, the initial length increased. Myocardial contractility was strengthened, and the stroke volume increased. This is called heterometric autoregulation. This regulation is discovered and clarified by Frank and Starling, so it's also called Frank-Starling law, and the curve is also called Frank-Starling curve. The mechanism of heterometric autoregulation is similar to that of skeletal muscles. When the initial length of sarcomere is 2 to 2.2 micron, the contractility reaches the maximum. So the initial length at this time is called the optimal initial length. Before the optimal initial length, with the increase of the length, the effective overlapping decrease of thick and thin filaments increase. Thus, the contractility is strengthened, and the stroke volume increase. Differs from skeletal muscles, cardiomyocytes has strong resistance to excessive elongation. It's mainly due to the connexin in sarcomere. Connexin fixes myosin on Z-line to limit the passive elongation. In addition, there's a lot of collagen fiber in the extracellular interstitium. This structure makes the myocardium difficult to be stretched, so there's no descending branch. Due to heterometric auto-regulation, the stroke volume can be finely adjusted according to Wiener's return. The second factor is afterload. Afterload is the load the muscle bears during contracting. Ventricular contraction needs to overcome after pressure to open the valve and eject blood. Therefore, ventricular afterload is atrial pressure. To overcome the increased atrial pressure, the isovolumic systole would be longer. The ejection period would be shortened, so the stroke volume decreases. Ventricular volume at the end of systole increased. With the Wiener's return, the preload increased, lead to the increase of stroke volume. This is compensatory function. This curve expresses the relationship between cardiac output and afterload. It can be seen that when the atrial pressure changes between 80 and 170 millimeters of mercury, cardiac output keeps almost normal. This is consistent with our previous analysis. However, if the atrial pressure exceeds a certain range for a long time, the heart would undergo pathological changes. Eventually, the pumping function declines. Therefore, hypertension can lead to ventricular hypertrophy, expansion, and heart failure. The third factor affecting cardiac output is myocardial contractility. Contractility is an intrinsic mechanical feature. With the contractility increasing, cardiac output increases, called homeometric auto-regulation. From the figure, we can see that when the myocardial contractility is enhanced, the cardiac function curve shifts up and left. Myocardial contractility is the basis of neural and humoral regulation. The fourth factor is heart rate. In a certain range, cardiac output is proportional to the heart rate. If the heart beats too fast, more than 180 beats per minute, the ventricular diastole is shortened significantly. The filling decreases greatly. Thereby, the stroke volume and the cardiac output decrease. If the heart rate is lower than 40, ventricular filling and the stroke volume have reached the maximum, but the heart rate is too low, cardiac output decreases. Let's do a summary. 4 factors affect cardiac output. Preload determines myocardial initial length, adapts the stroke volume to venous return through heterometric auto-regulation. Atrial pressure is the afterload. The increase of atrial pressure can reduce cardiac output, but the body has compensation to recover it. Long-term hypertension will cause pathological changes, even heart failure. Neural and humoral factors can regulate the pumping function by affecting the contractility and the heart rate. That's all for this class. Thank you for listening. See you.